Okay, thank you. The Premier is currently visiting the impacted areas in the north and potentially will be staying overnight. So I can give an update on some of the damage assessments. I just want to stress that this is a particularly difficult operation. Because of the storm surge, particularly at the high tide this morning, it was difficult to get emergency crews and police into some of the low-lying areas. That is now beginning to happen, so we will get more accurate information about damage in some of these communities. However, we have had Queensland Fire and Rescue aerial crews in the air doing a rapid damage assessment on a number of communities. And I can provide a bit more detail on some of those, and particularly focused on the areas hardest hit, where the cyclone crossed in the Mission Beach area. To give you some example, in Mission Beach itself, which is quite a long stretch of beach, there are around 22 properties with major structural damage. In Tully Heads, 21 properties with major damage, 19 described as medium and 12 with minor damage. In the Port Hinchinbrook area, 70 boats in the harbour with major damage to them. Cardwell, which received quite a significant impact, around 60 properties with major structural damage, 100 described with medium level damage and 50 with minor damage. I do want to stress, however, that this is aerial surveillance, and until we get people on the ground making direct assessments property by property, they are preliminary assessments, and I think that does give an indication that there is quite significant structural damage to properties, particularly in the area where the cyclone crossed the coast. There are a number of other communities where it's been particularly difficult to get people in, where we still haven't been able to make assessments, and that includes communities such as Halifax, Lucinda, Taylors Beach and Silkwood. However, as the day unfolds, we will get people in there and get more of an impact. But the preliminary assessments, particularly in the area where the cyclone crossed the coast, are showing quite significant structural damage. And as I've indicated, earlier this morning the storm surge actually prevented us from getting people on the ground. In terms of current concerns, we do still have concerns for flash flooding. There is particularly heavy rain in a range of areas. We're keeping an eye particularly on areas such as Ingham and also Garoo, and of course there will be other areas right across the region where heavy rain is occurring, where flash flooding will occur as the day progresses. The storm surge issue has now eased in communities in Cairns and Townsville. However, the storm surge there was as predicted and ultimately was about half a metre above the highest tide level, and that was in excess of what occurred in many of those communities last night. The overnight shelters, particularly in Cairns and Townsville, are now closing down and people are going home. However, there are a number of communities where people effectively are homeless. Red Cross teams are moving in particularly areas such as Tully and Innisfail, where more permanent evacuation centres will be established as the need arises, and that will be happening from this afternoon. The government and federal government have activated personal hardship assistance for those people that are directly affected by the cyclone, and that can be accessed by calling the Department of Communities on 1800 173 349. In terms of power outages, we're still around 180,000 plus homes without power. There's still not a lot of detail on transmission lines. That's simply because of the fact that they need to be physically inspected, and there are still some difficulties getting aerial assets in those areas where the damage is likely to have occurred. So that will be an issue which we'll get more information on as the day progresses. Queensland Health has reopened the Cairns-based hospital emergency department as at 11 a.m. this morning. The temporary facility, which was established at Fretwell Park, will continue operating until mid-afternoon, and that will then transition into the operation of the hospital in its current site on the Esplanade. In terms of calls to the SCS number 132500, we've had over 1,500 calls to that number overnight. We expect that to increase now as people, particularly in areas such as Cairns and Townsville, begin returning to their homes. And additionally, to help cope with what we expect to be a significant demand for SES resources, there will be an additional 500 SES personnel flowing into the region by Wednesday. including 100 from New South Wales as the initial deployment. With respect to schools, the advice is that a decision will be made by 1 p.m. today. So I simply urge parents to stay tuned to their local radio and also can access the website if they're able to determine whether the school in their particular area will open tomorrow. And finally, Cyclone Yasi is currently around 385 kilometres from Mount Isa, currently as a Category 2 cyclone, but it is weakening into a low-pressure system, but it's still expected to pass over Mount Isa around 10 p.m. tonight. It's still quite a significant storm. I might ask if the Assistant Commissioner wishes to add anything, and then also Bruce Grady from EMQ, then we're happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Minister, and afternoon, everyone. The Minister's covered the police operations very well. Our operations in North Queensland were hampered to a large degree this morning. It was very difficult to put rotary wing or fixed wing aircraft up to get a thorough assessment. Police got into Cardwell very early this morning, but as the Minister mentioned, because of storm tides, had to leave Cardwell straight away for their own safety. They're now back into Cardwell and are doing a more thorough assessment by foot. I'd expect later on this afternoon we'd be in a better position to give better descriptions of the level of damage in that particular community. It's been extremely difficult for the police operations. There's been a large amount of vegetation blocking roads, so it's been very difficult to access some of those coastal communities by vehicle. But I'd expect by later this afternoon we'd have a better description of what's actually the extent of the damage in those communities. Thank you, Minister.
Look, the SES have been cutting their way with chainsaws into as many communities as they can. The purpose of this is to get an early assessment of the damage. This is not to start the repair. It's very important that we get an understanding of the extent of the damage so that when the repair crews come in, they can be targeted at the areas of most need and that those SES volunteers can make the greatest positive impact in the quickest possible time. So we expect that repair work will start from tomorrow when we can get additional resources into the area and those volunteers will be working, as always, hard for their communities.
Minister, the 100 people at Cardwell unaccounted for. Have you established what's happened there?
I don't have any direct information on that. The Assistant Commissioner may wish to add something to that.
Thanks, Minister. We heard that issue that was raised. We've got local police talking to local government. I believe the issue was raised by a member of local government. That has not been confirmed, that there's 100 people missing. I think one of the challenges for such a massive operation is that whilst there was a roughly 10% of that population who didn't voluntarily evacuate, many others, many still choose to evacuate after they have those conversations with police. So as police move back into those communities, they go through that process of reconciling, I guess, all those who have evacuated, and as people return to their communities. And as previously stated, I think as police move into those areas, as nature allows them to, we'll be in a better position to give better feedback on that this afternoon.
Any reports of injuries at this stage?
No, that's a good point. We still don't have any reports of fatalities or casualties or major injuries as a result of this weather event.
It's such an amazing event, considering what we had here. It must just be amazing. Do you think it's good luck or good management that we've found ourselves in this situation?
I think it's a combination of the fact that people have listened to the advice and taken the appropriate decisions to relocate. Now, obviously, there have been a few people in some communities that chose not to, and thankfully no harm has come to them on all reports to date. I do stress, however, there are still a number of communities where it's been very difficult to get any direct information about. There's still some that we can't get into. So at this stage, we've had no reports of injury. However, I just caution that there are still those few communities that we still haven't been able to get people into.
Minister, what's the situation with roads?
Well, there are a number of roads cut in the area, and of course with the heavy rain that's occurring, that may continue today, particularly with flash flooding. But I can get more detail on that.
Particularly the Bruce Highway, Minister, can you be more specific
Yeah. I haven't got that information on the Bruce Highway at this point. But,
probably be cut near their home hill.
I just stress that there is quite heavy rain, so there will be roads, including the Bruce Highway, that will be impacted by flooding, particularly over the next few hours.
Minister, you're talking about 500 SES personnel getting in there. Do you see a role for the Australian Defence Force, as happened in the Brisbane floods, that we'll need a few hundred of them as well to augment the SES staff? And is that being worked on?
Yes, all of those issues are being worked on at the moment. This initial deployment of SES is simply to respond to the initial calls that are coming in, but there'll be work undertaken today and obviously into the night and over the next few days as the damage assessment teams are able to get in and assess the structural damage, the damage to public infrastructure, all of those issues in terms of Defence Force personnel, additional SES and others, including rural fire volunteers. All of these resources are being examined in terms of support to those communities over the next few days.
You will need the help of the ADF, won't you?
Highly likely, absolutely, yes.
What's the situation with other access to the north via air, for example?
Well, at this stage, my understanding is that the airports are still closed, but those assessments are being made locally through district disaster groups.
Any idea when they would be reopened?
Not at this stage. I don't think we have any word on that. No,
they're still assessing the impact of weather. There is still very heavy rain in much of the north and inland as it moves, but they intend to open them as soon as it's safe to do so.
And has rail been cut?
I've had no reports that rail has been cut at this stage. However, I think that all public transport at this stage in the rail is not operating.
Are there evacuation centre plans for Mount Isa?
Well, the local disaster group will have those plans in place as a part of they're required to have plans for evacuation centres. At this stage, and hopefully the predictions are correct, the cyclone will reduce its intensity to a low pressure system, so hopefully evacuation centres won't be required, but as is the case with all local disaster groups in Queensland, they are required to have contingencies available for evacuation centres and they'll be making those decisions throughout the day as they get more information from the Bureau.
We saw it in the floods in Brisbane. Are you concerned about looting incidents?
There's been no reports of that to date. The Assistant Commissioner might like to make some comment on that.
I think that's a very good question. It's just part of our standard planning now. Whenever we have an event of this nature, we, when safe, we forward deploy police to look after those issues, and that'll be the case with this event as well. The issues of protection of life and property are always remain number one.
You talk about, Minister, a long-term or a longer-term accommodation for those that are homeless in the likes of Tully. How long do you think you may have to prepare a facility for them?
Well, ultimately, the evacuation centres are relatively short term. The Department of Communities will obviously need to identify those people that do require longer term accommodation, as they've done with the floods that have occurred in other parts of the state. And they have that planning in place prior to this event to identify firstly those people that can't move back into their homes, and then secondly to identify where they can appropriately place them for the longer term.
So it would be the likes of demountables in the community or move them out?
Well, it may well be existing housing in the community. They've put a lot of time and effort into identifying properties that are available, and those assessments are being made today and obviously into the future in the next couple of days. The important thing initially is to get those people, as they discover today that they can't move back into their homes, into the temporary evacuation centres, and then individually assessments will be made as to what longer-term accommodation is required.
1 in 3 houses either destroyed or lost rooms. There's going to be a lot of people, isn't it, that needed to be accommodated in time?
Potentially, yes, and that planning is well underway with that expectation.
Are you planning more of these briefings this afternoon, Minister?
We've got a State Disaster Management group later on this afternoon, and my expectation is there will be another briefing then, but we'll advise you of that throughout the afternoon.
Just considering where we were this time yesterday, and you've studying on all the meetings, looking where we are today, did it end up as bad as what you had feared at the worst case scenario?
Oh, not at all. I think we're all breathing a sigh of relief, Queensland-wide, Australia-wide, that we didn't get the extent of damage that was predicted. If this cyclone had struck a major population centre, and I do stress the people in Mission Beach, Tully and those surrounding communities have had an awfully frightening experience. We can't take that away from them. But thankfully, no one has been seriously injured. We've had no loss of life. but the potential was there. This was the worst cyclone this country has experienced potentially for 100 years, and I think that due to very good planning, a very good response from the local disaster management groups, the state level groups, all emergency services agencies and the councils, we've been able to keep people safe. Our system works on the fundamental principle that the protection of human life is the number one principle. So all of our decisions are based on protecting life. That's why we took the worst case scenario and evacuated people from high risk areas. And I think that planning and that decision and the information that was provided those communities in large part has resulted in no loss of life or serious injury.
In hindsight, were all those